Heartbeat Alaska is brought to you in part by Coca-Cola.
By Cook Inlet Region Incorporated, an Alaska Native corporation promoting economic and social progress for people throughout the state. By the generous support of the Alaska Native Health Board. Heartbeat Alaska is also brought to you by the Alaska Commercial Company, Alaska's leading retailer of food, family apparel, and general merchandise in remote Alaskan communities, with continuous service since 1867.
Under one sky, with separate languages and ways, we are the heartbeat of Alaska. We open our hearts to you and welcome you to Heartbeat Alaska.
Hello and welcome to Heartbeat Alaska. I'm Jeannie Green. Thank you so much for joining me. On today's program, we have the report from KYUK-TV in Bethel. Also, a special report on the Inuit Circumpolar Conference. They met this week here in Anchorage. We have all that plus news around the state, but first, here's Gary Fife with Native News Across the Nation.
This is Native News Across the Nation. I'm Gary Fife. An almost $250,000 budget cut planned for the Indian Health Service still commands the attention of tribal leaders and Native health professionals. Accounts in Native newspapers and broadcasts say the 1995 Indian Health Service funding request is $1.8 billion. So far, Indian Health Service officials have been saying they want to make budget and personnel cuts at the administrative level, but Natives are saying that isn't what they've been seeing. They've also been saying that the president is making health care a national priority, but the cuts are being made to the people who need it the most. For Alaska Natives, the Clinton administration budget reductions could mean a year-long delay in the completion of the new Alaska Native Medical Center in Anchorage, a reduction in medical staff at hospitals around the state, and could suspend work on improvements to water and sanitation projects. An alarming rate of suicide is plaguing Ojibwe communities in northwestern Ontario, Canada. The Manchester Guardian News Service reports 11 young people have attempted to take their lives since the beginning of March, and that 5 have died. The remote reserve is accessible only by boat or plane and suffers from major housing and employment deficiencies, among other things, and that's left to leaving Native youth despairing about their future. The town of Kasigkuk has been hardest hit, and leaders there say the Canadian government has ignored them. Natives of interior Alaska will be meeting on March 15th to confer on their political strategies for the upcoming gubernatorial and statewide elections. The Tanana Chiefs Conference is set to hold its 1994 convention, and the theme is Discover the Power, Discover the Native Vote. In December, Native politicians and leaders met in Anchorage in a closed-door political summit where the importance of this year's elections was raised. A consensus opinion says that this year may be the last opportunity to flex Native electoral power and elect officials who are sympathetic to Native issues and priorities. Several candidates for governor have already committed to the meeting, and TCC delegates will also be discussing issues such as subsistence and sovereignty. Tribal government officials of the Mescalero Apache tribe have turned more to the private sector to find a partner for a nuclear waste storage site. The funding from the federal government was cut off in Congress last year, and the tribe has been talking to private utility companies about the idea. Last Friday, the tribe hosted several such utility and business executives to talk about storage of spent nuclear fuel in monitored retrieval storage sites, the MRS concept. Mescalero Tribal President Wendell Chino has said in the past that the tribe would continue their search in spite of opposition from New Mexico state officials and environmental groups. The Tribal Council maintains that such an MRS project could bring jobs and generate income for the tribal treasury. And finally, when the 1994 Goodwill Games begin in St. Petersburg, Russia this July, a group of Alaska Native dancers hope to be taking part. The fourth-generation dancers of the Metlakatla Indian community have been invited to come and show their culture for the international sports fans during the games. But the Tsimshian dancers have got to come up with the funds to get there. They're a private effort, and without official tribal sponsorship, they've planned a series of local fundraisers to allow them to travel. The Metlakatla Dance Group says it will publicly acknowledge all those who have helped them participate in the 1994 Goodwill Games. This is Native News Across the Nation, and for Heartbeat Alaska, I'm Gary Fife.
Thanks, Gary. Next week, we'll have a report on Gary's trip to St. Mary's for their Lower Kuskokwim School District Educational Conference. We'll be back with John Active and KYUK's report right after these messages.
Do you know a Native American?
Maybe you rode in one lately.
Maybe you drank one last night.
Seen one on the Late Late Show?
Cheered for one lately?
Maybe you've been to a sweat.
Smoke 'em, peace pipe.
Come on, man, times have changed.
Free your mind.
Respect for the earth, respect for the water, respect for the Creator, respect for life itself.
As the purple sunset fades, are we really here alone? On the main street of the world, relocated from our homes, and all that's real seems so far away. Sacrificing tomorrow for yesterday. There's a heartbeat louder than thunder. Revolution is in the air. There's a heartbeat deep inside our mother. Are you too cool to care? One so clever, never speak too soon. You, one who knows better, to be sliding in and out of the room. With your friends close, your enemies closer. Careful now, not to force her. There's a heartbeat louder than thunder. Revolution is in the air. There's a heartbeat deep inside our mother. Are you too cool to care? darkness. Socialist, communist, democracy. Well, it can't be right when it's all wrong. Oh! And the spirit they could never really see. Well, you can't take away from me. There's a heartbeat louder than thunder. Revolution is in the air. There's a heartbeat deep inside our mother. Are you too cool to care? There's a heartbeat louder than thunder. There's a heartbeat coming up from deep down under. There's a heartbeat deep inside our mother. There's a heartbeat. Heartbeat.
Welcome back. Well, Red Thunder's making a loud noise here in Alaska. Since I started airing their videos, I've received many phone calls. If you'd like to get a CD or cassette, contact them at 310-247-7800. Write that down because we won't be putting that number up very often. Thank you so much for joining us once again for Heartbeat Alaska. We turn now to Bethel from KYUK Public Television with John Active.
Thank you, Jeannie. Jamai, hello, akumaugo. Here's the latest from southwestern Alaska. Myron Naneng has been re-elected president of the Association of Village Council Presidents. Naneng faced a challenge from Gloria Simeon, who Naneng hired as his vice president a few years ago. Also in the race, George Peter of Aqqaluk. Both Simeon and Peter said Naneng did not push hard enough for tribal sovereignty. Naneng, though, gets high marks from Native leaders for his work in fighting for subsistence rights and protecting fish and game resources. Most American children get to be entertained and educated in their own language. There's Sesame Street with characters the children can relate to, but for Yupik children in southwest Alaska, there's very little available in their own language and nothing at all on television. Students in a village on the Bering Sea coast are about to change that. Rhonda McBride tells us about the Tununak Puppet Theater.
It's a little cardboard box.
The Tununak students are nervous. They've never performed this play before, not even for their own village. They've brought the show here to Kasigkuk, where a big crowd has gathered for a dance festival. The students have done everything from writing the script to building the set and making the puppets.
We had to make the faces and paint the faces and make native clothes for each one of the puppets. I had to sew the fur together and put the designs on it, the Velcro.
Who did she remind you of?
My grandma.
Well, Grandma would be happy to know that this play is performed entirely in Yupik.
Previous to this class, our students had been fairly resistant to taking Yupik at the high school level. And Yupik had traditionally ended in the 6th grade in our school. We were trying to find a way to encourage the high school students to study Yupik.
While most of the students speak Yupik, they don't normally read or write in their native language, but the play gave them an important reason to do so.
The students in Tununak were clear from the project's inception that they were doing this for young children. They were doing this to please the little kids who would see a puppet show in their own language about Alaskan characters and things that they could relate to.
And the children did relate to this show. There was the hero, adept at using a harpoon and wrestling polar bears, skills he used to battle the bloodthirsty Angaiak, who hates the sound of barking dogs and will gobble up an entire dog team just for an appetizer. What did you enjoy the most doing?
Scaring them.
Younger children in particular got more out of this than they get when they watch television, Sesame Street and so forth in English. This is in their primary language. It can't help but strike them instantly what it's about. They're not having to translate in their mind. They're not missing every third or fourth words.
The play not only brought the children in closer touch with their own language, but also helped the older students stretch in other ways.
The more they serve, the better they feel about themselves. And they're also honing their own parenting skills and so forth by learning to be patient with children and to give to children. We think we're preparing them for a very important part of adulthood by encouraging them to care about little kids. We encourage our older students to always acknowledge little kids when they pass them in the hallway, to give them 5 or say, hey, how you doing? And the little kids stand up just a little bit taller when that happens.
In the past, Yupik hunter warriors went out subsistence hunting and gathering every day. The women remained home in the village, tending to the homes and children. When the men returned, and if they had been successful in their hunt, there was much to celebrate and food to share.
So it was with the students of the George Morgan High School in Kasigkuk, whose Cultural Heritage Week activities began on Saturday, February the 5th. Early that morning, 12 snow machines, driven by junior and senior high school students, rumbled out of the village of Kasigkuk to go and hunt moose between Angaiak and Aqqaluk. 2 moose were caught eventually and distributed to all the elders of the Upper and Lower Kalskag villages. While the hunters were out, some of the girls were taught how to sew mucklucks under the guidance of Annie Peterson. The boys were taught by Agnes Kamroff, Martha Gregory, and Martha Savage the art of creating their own malachayaks, fur hats with fur ear flaps. A week earlier, the students built a full-sized replica of the Kasigkuk, or traditional men's house, in the gymnasium. Upper Kalskag elder Willie Pitka Sr. taught the boys woodworking and later talked to them about what it was like to live in a Kasigkuk. Willie also taught them the art of skinning a fox and beaver. Special visitors to this year's Cultural Heritage Week were Gladys Jung of Bethel, who taught in Upper Kalskag in the 1940s, when the Bureau of Indian Affairs used to operate the schools.
Pretty a hard act to follow after Gladys's perspective in Kalskag.
Mike Williams of Angaiak was also on hand to talk about dog mushing, racing in the Iditarod, and the sobriety movement. That week ended with a play in the Kasigkuk called The War of the Eye, performed by English teacher Ed Frinks, junior and senior high school students. After the play, the students modeled their many works for the community to see, and the rest of the evening was spent dancing to the martial fiddlers.
I myself was invited to Kalskag to tell stories, and I especially enjoyed the potluck and fiddle dance afterwards, and I really enjoyed it. Thank you very much. Guyana Tangvagluchi, thank you for watching. Reporting from public radio and television station KYUK in Bethel, Alaska, I'm John Active.
Thank you, John Active from KYUK Public Television in Bethel. No, you viewers do not have to adjust your set. My Parky really is that pink. We'll be back with more news from Heartbeat, Alaska, right after these messages.
There's a heartbeat, loud as thunder.
During the Roman era, 28 was considered old.
In the 1800s, 60 was over the hill.
You got it! You gotta taste it all! Oh, the taste of Diet Coke. You gotta taste it all! Yeah, the taste of Diet Coke. You got it!
From Yakutat to Barrow, Alaska newspapers publish news that makes a difference in your community. Information about events and activities that is timely, accurate, and dependable. Stories about people who make the news in your community. Stories about world events that affect your community. And stories that reflect the diversity of all Alaskans. If it makes a difference in your community, you can read about it in an Alaska newspaper. Subscribe now.
The Inuit Circumpolar Conference Executive Council met in Anchorage recently. Members from Anchorage, Greenland, Russia, and Alaska met to discuss environmental issues and human rights issues, including the survival of indigenous peoples across the North.
There are many issues that they're talking about, the health status of Native people throughout the lands, issues dealing with United Nations and indigenous populations throughout the world, and then specific reports from each of the countries. Greenland did a report about the issues that they're working with, so has Russia, Alaska, and Canada. So there are many different projects that are ongoing. There was a great deal of discussion yesterday about the issues surrounding the health health status of Native people, in particular in the Russian Far East. Some of the facts that are becoming well known now is that their mortality rate has now overcome their birth rate. There are more people that are dying than are being born, and it's a very serious issue. They have a very serious tuberculosis problem in Chukotka.
The ICC Executive Council recognizes indigenous issues in each separate government. The Inuit of Greenland are unique because they govern themselves.
In Alaska, it's much more difficult than our situation in Greenland. You know, Greenland is a big island separated from the motherland, and with the arrangements we have with our own government, we have the jurisdiction of subsistence hunting as well. So the situation in Alaska is very critical, and we in the ICC is also critical about the situation and support the natives and Inuit in Alaska on their efforts on the subsistence issue.
The international participation is a strong example for other northern natives in self-governing.
Aspect, and what we're ultimately going towards is self-government. And I think there's a lot of comparisons that can be made, and throughout this whole process from 1977 on, there's been an evolution to the point where now I think we're quite a player in the international scene. And you know, as Inuit, over the past year and a half, we've also looked at the formation of an international business development council, which Canada and Greenland have formed. We're still in discussions with Alaska to create a sort of an economic free zone for the Inuit. So we've come a long way in a short amount of time.
Plans are underway for the 1995 General Meeting of the Inuit Circumpolar Conference, and that will be held in Nome. Over 700 people are expected to attend. I certainly enjoyed seeing some people from other countries that actually watch Heartbeat Alaska. I'd like to say hello to Minnie Gray from Canada and our good friends in Greenland as well as in Russia. One of the most wonderful things about our Native people is our sense of humor. If you have a favorite joke, get it on camera. If you lip sync, get it on camera. If you have talent in any area, please send me that video. I'm creating a third program, and it's going to be called On Camera, and it's nothing but entertainment and fun. You'll be hearing about that in the near future. In the meantime, please continue to send me your video from your village or community. Next week, we'll visit the village of Angaiak. Thank you so much for joining me here on Heartbeat Alaska. See you next week.
Hi, hi.